I want to begin The Merchant of Venice by looking at the very first scene, Act 1, Scene 1. Now, in this scene, we find out that Antonio is apologising for being sad or melancholic, and we'll concentrate on him because I think this gives us a rather interesting perspective. So the first line tells us that he's sad, but this is in the sense of melancholy, a very deep sadness that you can't always define. And notice also here the pronoun it, standing in for sad. It appears 7 times in 3 lines. And this lack of specificity leaves us as unsatisfied and perplexed as Antonio. What is it that has caused his sadness? I mean, if he was always sad, it wouldn't be a subject for the characters to be commenting on in the first place. The first characters to speculate are Salario and Salarino. We will see by their language here that they know him relatively well, but they do flatter him. They use metaphors and similes that speculate that his unhappiness is because his mind is tossing on the ocean, because his merchant ships, or argosies, are at sea. Salarino flatters him by suggesting his ships are like prominent citizens, reinforcing the idea that Antonio is important. And the idea of richness is emphasised by comparing the portliness of the ship's sails with portly men. So very briefly, you can now see how Salario continues this line of inquiry. He speculates that he'd also be worried, and thus melancholy, if all his ships were abroad. He uses the idea of throwing blades of grass into the air to check the wind direction and worrying over maps trying to think of safe places for his ships. Here we come away with a sense of ill fortune which might strike at any moment, something that foreshadows events later on in the play. Now, I'm not going to follow each exchange throughout the play, but I'm now going to focus on Antonio's words for the rest of the scene. Now, Antonio now refutes the theory that he's unhappy because his goods are at sea, saying they are not in one bottom trusted, with bottom here representing the hold of a ship. This gives rise to a second theory. Antonio must be in love. And although he immediately denies it, there is perhaps more to this theory. And there is now a change in the dynamic. 3 men, including Bassanio, now arrive, prompting Salario and Salarino to leave. Now, is this because they're jealous of the newcomers? Whilst Antonio tries to reassure them that they are dear to him, they leave slightly to his surprise, and he thinks that it must be because they have some other business. At this point, Graziano reaffirms Antonio's changed state, which Antonio dismisses as his role in life. And what's interesting to me about this is that Antonio's gone from what seems to be a happy man to a man who's now, his defined role is the melancholic. We're also introduced to Graziano here. He's a talkative character who offers Antonio advice and tells him not to play the melancholic. Antonio, of course, cannot just change, and Graziano and Lorenzo leave Antonio alone with Bassanio. Now, at this point, Antonio immediately asks about the lady to whom Bassanio wants to make a secret pilgrimage. Now, this is the first request Antonio's really made in the story so far, and we note the fact that it is a lady he mentions, suggesting whatever relationship Bassanio has is recent, and Antonio doesn't know her name, and pilgrimage suggests a visit to a place of reverence or a visit to an icon. Now, interestingly, Bassanio does not answer the question, but he begins by apologising for owing Antonio money, and more interestingly, owing him love. This has the tone of a parental relationship for me, where the love tends to flow more from the parent to the child and vice versa. And now Bassanio wants even more money that he hopes will help him clear both past and future debts. And notice that, like a good parent, Antonio offers help immediately and unconditionally. Note particularly the word extremist, the very furthest he can go. So how far will he go for Bassanio will of course become apparent later. In fact, Antonio is only hurt by the fact that Bassanio thought he needed to explain himself. This is what the phrase "wind about my love with circumstance" means. And in doing so, brings into question how much Antonio loves him, makes question of my uttermost. In other words, how could you say this? It means that you think that I wouldn't do this for you automatically. Antonio then commits to raising the money to help Bassanio, even though he actually has no collateral to do so. He will try what my credit can in Venice do, which means that whatever money Bassanio can raise will be done on the basis of Antonio's reputation. But notice these other words closely. His reputation, i.e. Antonio's reputation, shall be racked or stretched to the uttermost. And the rack was, of course, a form of torture in the Elizabethan period. Second, note the order of Belmont and Portia. The place comes first, and the rival for Bassanio's love is mentioned second, which suggests a degree of conflict. So, in summary, we've seen that Antonio has people around him who flatter him because he's powerful and he's rich. We've seen that he's close friends with Bassanio, Graziano and Lorenzo, and that his love for Bassanio extends to risking all he has to help him. And we also see that the main conflict here, at the moment anyway, is internal. It's within Antonio's mind. We can speculate that he loves Bassanio and that he feels obliged to help him, even though that may make him melancholic because he may lose him to Portia. But of course, this internal conflict will soon become external. But we'll look at that in another video. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe now so that you never miss any of my future posts.